This is like the pedway. The TTC has been subject of much criticism over the years. For many in the city of Toronto, it is the only way of getting around the city, and the TTC knows this and therefore will increase the price whilst offering little in return. You might get stabbed by a crazed hobo, you might end up being late for work, but fuck you, you need us more than we need you, so you sit out in the cold and you watch 3 out-of-service buses just pass you. Regardless, the TTC isn't all negativity. While many, including myself, think that its expansion has been stunted for no good reason, and it should take you way more places than it actually does, there's a certain comfort in it. For the most part, barring delays, it gets you anywhere within the city within an hour or so, and that's not including Scarborough or North York or anywhere outside of the core Toronto area, but it's one flat rate, so like you're able to cross the city for like $3.25. It's a fine alternative to Uber. Over the years, it has attempted to expand its coverage, sometimes with varying results, but the biggest failure in the TTC's history that is still standing today has to be the Scarborough RT, or Line 3 as it's known now. So join me today as I take a break from movies and TV shows, and for Toronto Media Month, I make my own little piece of Toronto-related media. So it all started in the early 70s. Go, which is the provincial transportation company, they do like commuter rails, launched its Go Urban initiative, which was to bring suburban transportation to Etobicoke and Scarborough, which at the time were not part of the Toronto area. It was there's a whole thing where everything was a different municipality. I'll get into that a bit later. But the plan included using the Krauss-Maffei transurban train cars, which, my god, that is a fucking terrible design. But of course, this didn't work, and then eventually the TTC got their mitts on the idea to expand rapid transit into Scarborough. And they ended up working with Go and the Ontario government to achieve this. So right away, you know, it's a bureaucratic shit show like it always is in Toronto. The TTC initially wanted to use streetcars to expand into Scarborough. Toronto is famous for its use of streetcars. We're one of the few cities in North America that has a sizable streetcar line, and you can actually see this if you go to Kennedy Station near the RT. There's visible streetcar tracks at Kennedy Station. However, Go and the Ontario government, which are in cahoots, I believe Go is part of the government in some form, wanted to utilize one of the TTC's newer projects as a test for the ICTS trains, and they decided on using the new Scarborough line after the government threatened to pull funding if they didn't find something for it. Within this proposal and the literal threat of pulling funding was a fuck up on a provincial level. Basically, Go bought a bunch of these trains for their Go ALRT service, which was struggling to get off the ground. The government, you know, was hoping to recoup some losses on the rolling stock of these ICTS vehicles, and they basically manipulated and forced the TTC to buy these trains and build a whole line around them. Something that would consistently return to bite the TTC in the ass for decades. And this thing had fucking issues from day one. Like, there was this whole thing, because they made a loop on the tracks because they'd anticipated streetcars, which are one-directional operated, whereas the Scarborough RT cars, they just go back and forth. And, you know, it was causing derailments, it was a whole problem, and, like, the technology they use for these trains is similar to that of the Vancouver SkyTrain or the Detroit People Mover. In fact, one could even consider the Scarborough RT the prototype, as both the SkyTrain and the People Mover opened shortly after this, and they had less fucking issues. The Scarborough RT consisted of 6 stations: Kennedy, which connected to the Bloor-Danforth line, Lawrence East, Ellesmere, Midland, Scarborough Town Center, and McAllen. There were actually expansions proposed. Initially, it was supposed to have more stations, but because the whole thing is a fucking money pit, none of that ever happened. Among the worst issues that the line suffered from are the weather-related issues. Initially, the electrified third rail was heated, but they decided to cut that from the budget, and as a result, there were issues with ice on the rails, causing the trains to not operate. During heavy enough storms and snow, it would prevent the trains from operating entirely, which resulted in them having to use shuttle buses. The Mark I train cars were intended to be completely automated, one of the earliest instances of an automated mass transit vehicle, but being the TTC, it's heavily unionized, and the concept of automated vehicles meant that less jobs would be created, so they altered the control center within the trains to house one operator, and wow, that was probably the best job you could get. It's like you basically just got to sit on your ass on the RT all day and just talk to control without pushing really any buttons. The trains had a very distinct and 80s looking design initially. Like, just look at that. Like, the way RT is spelled with the font, the color scheme, this thing is a fucking relic. The Scarborough RT is a very weird novelty item within our transit system. Like, we have this nice subway system, we have this network of streetcars, we have various bus lines, and then here we have this weird odd man out system that I think at the time was cutting edge technology, but less than 20 years after it was built, it was just like a piece of shit. And it's always like, oh god, you have to take the RT today? Like, why? Why don't you just take one of the buses? And you're probably asking, what is the Scarborough RT like? Well, it's a very cramped train car. I remember some kid telling me he was playing his PSP on here in high school, and a dude standing across literally just snatched it out of his hands, bolted out the door, and that was it. And the ride is bumpy, it's rickety, it's old. I'm not sure if it was always like that, but the 2 times I've rode it, that's really all I remember, and I'm riding it right now, and more likely, since I recorded this after I recorded the audio, it's a bumpy, uncomfortable ride now. The cars are fucking loud as shit. Like, you can hear it through headphones if you don't have them on full blast. Bro, it's like being in that fucking toilet that made Larry David deaf. And it's just like, you can tell it's just an old experimental train, and what it reminds me of the most is the whole broken down above ground rail line from Batman Begins, like to a T. This is what happens when you buy trains with a 25-year lifespan and force them to work for almost 40 years. 10 years and change later, Scarborough, Old Toronto, Etobicoke, and North York had all merged together to create the megacity of Toronto, and one popular point of discussion was what the fuck to do with the Scarborough RT. The rolling stock was shit, it was breaking down, the company built successors, but it didn't fit onto this arrangement, and whether or not this is because it was built for streetcars initially, I don't know. But this would start 2 decades of arguments over what to do with this fucking monstrosity they built. On the one hand, they could have just redone the entire track so that they could get the successor vehicles and have new train cars on the RT, but that would require construction to adjust the rails, something that would shut the line down and cause traffic issues for a minimum of 8 months. That's not even talking about the financial implications. This would cost like millions. Some even suggested just tearing out the 5 rail tracks and sticking the regular tracks for the subway trains to run on the pre-existing concrete structure, but that was shut down quickly. The concrete structure was too small to hold the regular subway trains. There are so many proposals to fix this line or to do something about this line, and it used to cause a ruckus in city council every couple of months, years, whatever. Like, if you ever want to see how bad bureaucracy has failed, just read up on the Scarborough RT yourself. There is so much about it that I can't even put into this video. Just city council discussions, and oh my god.
And they've been at it all day and getting quite cranky, I must say.
Someone even suggested, let's just keep extending it, but because these train cars weren't made anymore, we would have to pay to have them manufactured again, which wasn't worth it. It's just this horrid back and forth where somebody would suggest one thing, and then another person would suggest another thing, and then you'd think, you know, are they even disagreeing on this, like, you know, sincerely, or is one just being contrarian because they don't like the other guy? And this whole situation would just gum up city council for months until eventually they just said, fuck it, did nothing, and just left it there to rot. Like, months would pass, years would pass, somebody would just bring up another idea, somebody would bring up another counter idea, repeat, nothing got done. Scarborough RT would continue to burn a fucking hole in the pocket of the city due to the sheer amount of maintenance required, and the trains eventually just started dying. Like, the rolling stock was at one point plentiful, but now it's down to 5 trains in operation, and honestly, the line has been so unreliable for the past few decades, most people would rather just hop on one of the buses, which goes to all the same places the RT goes. As a result of this, the ridership numbers for the Scarborough RT have been abysmal for the past, like, decade and a half, with the only station besides Kennedy seeing any sort of significant traffic being the Scarborough Town Center. The rest of the stations take up various numbers of the bottom 5 for lowest ridership across all 4 lines, and all the stations are just like outdated and ugly, and they're just kind of in weird spots, and like you can see it, there's buses that just go to Kennedy Station, so why fuck around with the RT, which might get shut down halfway, and you have to take a bus anyway. I would love to say I have these memories of riding the Scarborough RT, that it's like this staple of Toronto, and that I'm gonna miss it when it's gone, but truth be told, I've rode this thing maybe 2 or 3 times in my entire life. I've lived in Toronto for 28 years, and I never really needed to use it. Nobody who lives in Scarborough really needs to use it because the bus lines, as mentioned, all go the same place. In fact, the video clips I am using, I literally just decided to go out there for an hour on a weekend and just shoot it for this video and to say I rode it one last time before it shut down. Scarborough RT is a monument to bad decision making at a municipal and provincial level. Of course, after decades of deliberation, arguments, proposals, and I'm sure several heart attacks for TTC employees, it was decided that in 2023, this year, the Scarborough RT would be decommissioned, and in its place an extension of the Line 2 Bloor-Danforth line would replace it, something that was argued against maybe 10 years prior to this. The two stops, Lawrence East and Scarborough Town Center, will remain and be remade as subway stations, and the line would continue north to Shepherd East. I can't help but think that they should have covered the areas that the RT covered a little better, maybe have it go more eastward towards Pickering, but the low ridership numbers indicate that all those areas would rather use the bus lines or drive directly to Kennedy Station. And Shepherd East implies that at some point the Purple Line, another blunder in our city's development, may actually get an extension to cover more ground and connect to the Bloor-Danforth line. So what is it that is so interesting to me about the RT that I was compelled to make a little mini documentary on it? The thing was a failure, it was shitty, nobody liked it, hardly anybody used it, and yet I find myself strangely sad to see it go. Well, it's kind of like when you have a pet that is just not a good pet. It's a dog that barks all the time, or a cat that pisses on the carpet and bites you. But you become so accustomed to its existence that when it's time for it to go, you know you're gonna miss it. The RT was the TTC's problem child. It was an untrainable dog, but it was just an interesting piece of city history. It's a fucking relic. It's a relic to life before the megacity, especially when the train cars still had their original colors before they decided to modernize it with that god-awful blue shrink wrap. The Scarborough RT is Toronto's version of the monorail from The Simpsons. The TTC got grifted into accepting new technology without thinking of the difficulties they would have maintaining it in the future. They failed on all fronts to do anything with it, and it's really hard to blame them because they never wanted it in the first place. They wanted streetcars. I remember there was a point where people were concerned that the thing was gonna fucking collapse due to concrete decay. It was just an occasional talking point among people who use the TTC. I never lived in Scarborough or anything, I barely even went to Scarborough, but everyone I knew from there did not fucking use this thing unless they were going to Scarborough Town Center. I actually asked a few people why they didn't use it, and as I mentioned before, most would say the bus is closer and it takes me directly to Kennedy Station. The thing is a mess, but honestly, I kinda hope they keep a little bit of the track just as a historical site. It's a monument to many things, to the bad decision makings of the government, the TTC. It's a monument to life before the megacity. It's a monument to a mode of transportation that we just couldn't get to work. And most importantly, it represents the risks this city used to take to make it better for the common working person. Or it was just a grift that caused a horrid financial strain on the TTC that stunted the expansion of our already behind the times subway system. Who knows, but in a way, I think we're all gonna miss the Scarborough RT, the Blue Line, Line 3 Scarborough, or whatever you want to call it. It's the same kind of feeling I had when they got rid of the old streetcars. It's like, yeah, they sucked, they broke down, the heat didn't always work, not all of them had air conditioning, but there's a certain comfort in the sounds they made. You got used to seeing them, and I'm still not 100% used to the new streetcars. It represents something that I've learned that a lot of older generations, boomers, have to learn, that the world around you is gonna change whether you want to change or not, and you'll die and it'll still keep changing. So thank you for joining me for the final ride of the Scarborough RT. I hope you enjoyed my eulogy of it. This is a whole nice little change of pace. I wanted to make one video for my Toronto Media Month based on Toronto history, and with the RT shutting down this year, I saw the perfect opportunity to document its last year. This is probably going to be the last time I ever ride it, so that's 4 times in my entire life. With that being said, starting next month, it's back to business as usual with movie and TV reviews, but if you want me to talk more about Toronto, the TTC, or whatever, let me know in the comments. I could easily do a video on the Purple Line, or Lower Bay, or one of the failed things that the TTC has done. So hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell, what.